the mortgage stress story, we don't believe will materialize. And there's a couple of reasons why, but that's speaking directly to the point of the anxiety that is existing right now around interest rates. So there is a record level of savings, 230 billion extra in the marketplace. So they are well in advance of their mortgage payments. So that buffer naturally exists. And that's for the people, Ben, who actually have a mortgage, because there's a whole bunch of people who don't have a mortgage or have a very low LVR, Ben, because they've actually been in the property ladder for a long time, and the price that they paid is much smaller than the value that exists now. So therefore, the mortgage, if they have one, represents a very small percentage of the value.
What percentage of people have a mortgage in Australia, Bryce?
Between 30 and 40%.
Yep. So it's around a third of people. So 2/3 of people own their homes outright or don't have a mortgage, right? So they're not impacted by this. And don't forget the pensioners, Bryce, who are sitting back going, finally, I'm going to get some return on my money in the bank, right? Yeah. So, as the term deposits start to actually get to some type of level of, I'm going to be able to also spend that money in the economy as well. So if only a third of people have all this debt, what are they doing? Do they own properties? Well, yes, they do. They own 2 or more now. Well, that's probably going to show up in the data as well, as I said, in terms of the census data. Again, go back to the data, look at the percentages of owner-occupied mortgages versus investor mortgages. Investor mortgages were still pretty soft for these last 18 months compared to owner-occupiers. They're improving and they're going up. It's the first home buyers who are coming out of the market, but they were forward demand because they got all of those stimulus incentives on the back of COVID and in terms of those home builder schemes and so forth. So what we're seeing is a bit more of a normalization of the property market. And again, normalization, not crisis, not anything that's going to push us towards a serious contraction in values.
Very good. Now, Ben, you were digging around. It might be a good spot to talk about some of the data that you found with NAB that can help debunk some of the mortgage stress property retention idea that we're talking to here.
Yeah, so there's a lot of data, and this is data that you can all go and access because you can see these. I looked at both the CBA and also the NAB statements. So they've recently released their financial statements. So it's not hard, it's publicly available information, and you can download their investor PowerPoint pack. What the naysayers are talking about is that there's going to be a fixed rate cliff. Oh, cliffs. I just only need to go back in terms of the, the interest only cliff that we were going through, like
JobKeeper cliff.
All of these cliffs that never really materialize into forced selling in concentrated areas en masse, right? So that's what we're trying to talk about here in terms of panic. Selling, not happening. So in terms of the fixed rate story, we did see that there's going to be, in terms of billions, so this is fixed rate home loans from NAB, and they have about 15% market share. Okay, so you can see here that up until 6 months till September 2022 is 16% of those fixed loans will expire. In terms of March, 6 months to 2023 will be 17%, and then 6 months to September 23, another 29%. And then it drops off over there. So a lot of people effectively took 2 and 3 year fixed rate loans. Now, what is really important here is 30% of customers with repayments on time or less than 1 month ahead. So this is what we talk about in terms of where are the risk exposures in these mortgage books. So we are seeing here that basically NAB is saying 30% of their customer repayments are on time or greater than 1 month ahead, which 67% of which are either investment loans or openless mortgages. So in other words, what that is saying is of that 30% where the customer is only 1 month in terms of their mortgages, 67% of those are investment loans. Now, how do you explain that? Well, it's simple. You do not make advance payments on an investment loan. You usually pay interest only, and you make the minimum repayment if you have a principal place of residence and you have a debt against that, which is non-deductible. So it logically makes sense that in terms of the higher risks of people being able to make those repayments is very low, Bryce.
Interestingly, some of the data that they've come through says their LVR down from 44.6% to 37.6% since March 20. So clearly since the pandemic kicked off, their LVR has dropped, and greater than 90% of customers did have excess borrowing capacity. So they didn't go to their max. So there was built-in buffer for people as well in terms of the amount that they could have had versus the amount that they spent.
And to finish that story off, when you go for a loan, understand that the bank doesn't lend you a borrowing amount based on the actual interest rate you pay. They do a concept called an assessment rate or a floor rate. And NAB also in their document says here, all loans originated in the past 2 years assessed on principal and interest basis using a floor rate of at least 4.95.
4.95.
Or a buffer of at least 2.5%. And since that time has now moved to a buffer of 3% in November of 2021. So what that's basically saying is, and when we see it in our own mortgage assessments, is that you now have a situation where most loans are being assessed as a minimum of 5.5 or 6% buffer rates. And so all of these loans that were issued were not issued with a 2% servicing rate or an assessment rate. They were issued with a minimum of 4.95. And you can also see that data in CBA's stress testing of their book as well.
So Ben, for context, NAB has 15% market share and Commonwealth Bank has 25% market share. So between the two of them, they have 4 out of every 10 loans, right, of all the market. And this is the feedback. You talked about CBA, you've looked at some data. They're not panicking at all about their books, right? And we've got resilient banking systems that have recourse lending, AAA rated scores. So people should draw comfort from that, right?
No doubt. And I've even gone in to have a look at their mortgage delinquency rates and their mortgage stress rates and their approved applicants by borrowing capacity. I mean, here's another example here in terms of first half of 2022, 92% of applicants borrowed less than capacity. All right. And only 8% borrowed at capacity. So 92% had more in the tank if they wanted to borrow more the last half of the year. So again, all indicators don't point to any severe mortgage stress. But what's going to happen, Bryce, is that there will be data that will come out over the next 6 or 12 months, which will see a small deterioration in this. Because make no mistake, we need to acknowledge that some people probably have pushed themselves a little bit too hard. And there's no mistake that there'll be a small group of people and a small percentage of people who are going to struggle if interest rates go up to, say, 4.5% when they were originally paying 2%. But also bear in mind that because this last wave of boom has been owner-occupier led, the question is are they forced sellers? Now, they might be forced sellers if they've bought rural properties or whatever they've bought and they're thinking, well, we don't need to hold that anymore. But I'm not seeing that come up. I'm seeing more of an ability for people to go, I'm going to hold on to this. I want to see it mature. I'm going to enjoy it. And I've got a nice amount of savings and I've actually done pretty well during the pandemic. And, my
job security is good.
Job security is good. So we're not necessarily seeing that. So the mortgage stress story and the fixed rate cliff, please, I want more data, share more data with me. But there'll be a small percentage, very small number of people who will have trouble in terms of meeting those commitments, and they'll have a choice to make in terms of what they do, but it's not systemic and it's not a great risk in terms of mortgage stress.
Top 7 reasons why we think the property crash is unlikely and we're more likely going to have a softer landing. Number 1 was we're in a strong economy. Number 2 was around housing supply. 3 was the immigration story. 4, we said that we don't believe that mortgage stress story will materialize.